All right, another day, another show. Uh, what's going on? And first off, before we talk about the show, where's the third stooge?
I I don't see him. He must
Uh,
not be here.
he must not be here. So what's going on, Robert?
Well, it's just the 2 of us, Jerry, and today we have a great guest with us today. I I love talking about sleep tech. Not and
Yes,
I mean sleep techs, who actually perform tests and work with patients, but I love sleep technology.
yes,
And,
you do.
I do. And so I'm always sort of geeked when we have someone who can come and articulate, new types of therapies and technologies that are on the horizon for us or that may be available now. We have Dr. Cathy Goldstein with us today. She is a renowned sleep specialist, neurologist with the University of Michigan Sleep Disorder Center. And she's going to come and talk to us today about some of the things that she's been working on, but really specifically about something that has just been released or received FDA approval. There's a new company called Huxley Medical that has a new home sleep testing device called the Sansa. And the only time I've ever heard the term Sansa before was from Game of Thrones. So I got to find out at some point where they got this name from. Maybe it's an acronym. I don't know.
It sounds really interesting. On 2 points. One of the Game of Thrones. I haven't watched the show, nor have I read the book, so or any of the books. So
You're missing out,
it'll be.
Jerry.
Oh, hey, that's what everybody's told me. One of these days, I'll make some time for that. But the other part is it'll be interesting to hear about the technology because
Yeah,
all of these things have something new, right? That are available, and if it just got FDA approval, that's another cool thing to talk about and listen to. So,
certainly.
um, you ready? Shall we go
Yeah,
to the
let's
show?
jump into the episode. We there's only 2 of us and we we're condensing our words today since there's only 2 of
All right. So here's to condensing. Onto the
us.
show. Now, a word from our sponsor, Medbridge Healthcare. Medbridge Healthcare is a leading provider of sleep lab management services and home sleep apnea testing. Medbridge partners with hospitals, healthcare systems, and medical academic institutions to offer comprehensive, fully integrated services for sleep disorders.
Lights out.
Welcome, everyone, once again to another episode of SleepTech Talk, the sleep podcast with your hosts and friends, Emerson Kerr, Robert Miller, and me, Dr. Gerald George Mannikarote. I say your friends, Emerson, but unfortunately, Emerson isn't here today. He just couldn't make it. Honestly, what happened is he is stuck in an Uber, and there's just no way he can make it as a result of that. But we still have a fantastic show available for you today. Really great show with a fantastic and fabulous guest, as always. But before we get started with that, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you, all of you, for tuning in, listening to what we have to say, listening to our guests and all the new products and everything cool that we keep bringing out. Thank you so much for that. Continue to share the show with your friends, family, anybody who's sleep curious. Please continue sharing it with each and every one of them. And a huge shout out to our sponsors. We can't do this without them, and we thank them so much for the same. With that being said, Robert, what's going on today?
Hey, Jerry, we've got a great show today. We've got Dr. Cathy Goldstein. She's a renowned sleep specialist and professor of neurology at the University of Michigan Sleep Disorder Center. She also leads the Mobile Technologies Core at the Eisenberg Family Depression Center and Mobile Technology Research Innovation Collaborative. Dr. Goldstein's research focuses on using consumer sleep tracking devices and mathematical modeling to study sleep patterns and circadian rhythms in everyday settings. She's an internationally recognized expert in sleep tracking technology and has contributed significantly to guidelines and recommendations in this field. Dr. Goldstein also serves as senior editor for the seminal text Principles and Practice of Sleep Medicine and holds editorial roles for Up to Date in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. In her clinical practice, Dr. Goldstein treats patients with conditions such as OSA, insomnia, restless leg syndrome, circadian rhythm, and sleep wake disorders. She's also involved in training future sleep physicians and the physician champion for virtual care and Epic at the University of Michigan. She's also recently, and a big part of what we'll talk about today, she was involved and was the PI for the validation study for a new medical product from the company Huxley Medical called Sansa. So, Dr. Goldstein, it is a pleasure to have you with us today. And we would love to just jump in and let you tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice. We have so many underachievers in our podcast that join us each week. So we're happy once again to have a person. I don't know how you have time to do anything else.
Yeah, so it was an interesting route that brought me to sleep. When I was in college, I'm one of those kids that I had the Fisher Price doctor set, etc. But when I was in college, I thought biology was kind of boring. You were just memorizing a list of facts. So I ended up getting a math degree. And then when I pursued medicine, I actually chose neurology. And when you look at neurology, approaching a neurological problem, it's kind of like approaching a mathematical proof. So I absolutely loved it from that esoteric standpoint. But then came neurology residency, and I realized that neurological problems were very sad. The treatment often wasn't very good. And we didn't do a lot of preventative medicine. And when I first rotated in sleep and I started to learn about the impacts obstructive sleep apnea could have on specifically cardiovascular health, as well as quality of life, metabolic health, I thought this is for me. And it really has been a wonderful journey. And then things kind of came back full circle when I started, and I've both been in practice and in academics. I started out in practice actually in the northern suburbs of Chicago. And then I came into academics because I wanted the research and teaching component. And the first group I was introduced to was some mathematicians that modeled sleep and circadian rhythms. And that's how I started my research area of using wearable signals, primarily from the wrist, to estimate sleep and circadian rhythms and kind of understanding the pros and cons of that. And it's been an exciting time because, as we know, the last decade has really showed that there's been an incredible emergence of these devices, and they're all over the place. And it's a great way to engage with my patients too, because everybody's using these.
Doc, it's so cool to hear that. And could you tell us a little bit more about your work with circadian rhythms back when I was in clinic? That was something that, because it was a sleep clinic, that was always fun to get something like that because you're dealing so much with OSA, and then to have something with somebody who has a circadian rhythm disorder, and for both of us, we were sleep techs at one point, and that also, there's a kind of a little soft spot in your heart for for that. Would you talk a little bit about your circadian rhythm disorder experience?
Probably especially when you guys were seeing the individuals that you say lights out is at 10 p.m. and they're like 10 p.m. My lights out is 4 a.m. Yeah, so I fell in love with circadian rhythms because I was trained by one of the world experts, Phyllis Z. She's the queen of circadian rhythms. And I found them fascinating too. And it just brings me back to that computational way of approaching things is understanding how to treat circadian rhythms. It's all about understanding where people's internal clock is, and the with that internal clock positioning, the appropriate time to give them melatonin, the appropriate time to give them light, the appropriate time to have them avoid light. And these are all kind of understood biological properties, but based on that individual and what their circadian rhythm disorder is, it's all about timing. And so, I sit down with my patients with circadian rhythm disorders and I tell them, this is where I estimate your clock is based on when you fall asleep and naturally wake up. This is how light moves the clock if it's before you fall asleep. This is how light moves the clock if it's after you rise. This is where melatonin needs to go. And then we come up with a whole well-timed plan on how to shift their clock so they can align with what's right to them. And the cool thing about this is, unfortunately, as you guys know very well, in clinical practice, we don't measure circadian phase, right? There's these body temperatures that they put in the rectum, these thermometers, and obviously that's not going to fly. And we don't measure melatonin. You have to have somebody in the dark for like 6 hours before they fall asleep, spitting into this little tube. So we don't do that. And the cool thing is you can use math and actually calculus to understand when people's circadian rhythms are. And that's how I worked with our math department here on trying to estimate people's rhythm from wearable devices. And I hope that one day that's something that we use in practice.
So I'm glad you talked about mathematical modeling because your study of technology and then using this mathematical modeling, you know, we know that the science of sleep diagnostics is changing, and we're seeing PPG technology at a level that we've not seen it before, and we've talked a little bit about it on this particular show with other guests about the sort of the crossover between clinical grade quality data and consumer grade. Could you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, and that is one thing we always want our patients to understand. So for me, currently in the current amount of study we have, the current amount of data we have about these devices and their current clearance, these are made as a consumer self-care product. And I mean, when we talk about how we measure sleep, though, if you think about how a doctor evaluates or a PA or sleep tech evaluates a patient outside of a sleep study for a sleep disorder, how do we ask them about their sleep? When do you usually go to bed? How much do you sleep at night? When do you wake up? So our current tool is so non-precise that for me, even though these aren't perfect tools, they're not medical tools, at least they're giving me something to augment the patient history. And that's where I think we have a great role. But as you said, you pointed out something great. So PPG, for new listeners, photoplasmography, it's an optical measure of small blood flow. We think about it, it's the technology behind pulse oximetry on the finger, but these wearable devices are now monitoring PPG on the wrist. And so you have the potential to extract all these cardiac autonomic features from that PPG. We don't entirely know what they mean yet. We don't know how well that they compare to gold standard, but it really is a wealth of information that could be beneficial. And what I tell my patients, because they really like those scores as far as readiness and restedness and et cetera, I tell them that there are limitations. There's a lot we don't know, but I always say, do an N of one study, like see what these scores look like on a day you started a new exercise program, on a day that you had some alcohol as compared to not, when you got your COVID vaccine, and people can see changes within their own data. And I think that shows there's really exciting promise there.
Fantastic. I love this particular topic. I could talk about it, and I'm a little bit jealous because I bet that you probably have some visibility into technology that's maybe not available yet through some of the research that you do. And I know that it's certainly one of the things we wanted to talk about on the show. Um, so doing the research, and I hope that there are other companies that you're working with, and you get to see lots of new things that are on the horizon that are going to change the field of how we and how we diagnose patients who have different types of sleep issues. But do you want to tell us a little bit about your involvement with Huxley Medical and the Sansa home sleep testing device, which was recently approved by the FDA?
Yeah, so we definitely have a problem in the overlap of sleep and cardiology, where we know that atrial fibrillation is it is a hotbed of OSA. So 30 to 80% of AFib patients might have OSA. And if you don't get your OSA treated, you're much more likely to have a failed procedure for your AFib. So often to get people out of AFib, they do something called a cardioversion or ablation. These are big deal procedures. No one wants somebody electrically intervening with their heart if it's not going to work. And if your OSA isn't treated, you're much more likely to have this recur. So we oftentimes get these referrals from cardiology to evaluate these atrial fibrillation patients for OSA. And like everything in healthcare now, access is terrible. And unfortunately, I'll have people with classic symptoms of OSA, loud snoring, pauses in their breathing. They wait up to 6 months to see me, and they'll see me. I had one the other day. He was like, "This is great. I'm so glad I'm seeing you today because I have my ablation next week." And you guys know what sleep labs are like. We're not getting sick. I mean, you can't instantaneously get a patient in that fast, right? So this is a big area for improvement. And I obviously don't recommend products, no food, like rarely do physicians, but I just think there's a really interesting approach that this product takes that kind of helps with the co-diagnosis of AFib and obstructive sleep apnea. So what this device is, it's a home study, but it's a little different than the home studies out there now. So it's non-flow based. There's no measurement of airflow in the nose, but it's a single point of contact. So the entirety of the device is in a patch, because we've all seen those records where you get them back, patient takes home their HST, brings it back, and you're like, is this pulse ox even on the patient's finger? Like, I don't even know what is going on during this study. And then they've already given back. And for us, they might drive 6 hours back to the UP, we can't get to them again. And so any form factor that's going to reduce complexity and gives the patient more, not only more comfort, but it's going to give you better data if they can get this on correctly and wear it through the night. And we know that home sleep studies can fail up to a third of the time. So anything that makes it easier so we can make a better diagnosis and give our patients faster, more precise treatment, it's better. And a lot of insurers now are actually requiring these 2 nights of study. And if they're not going to wear the pulse ox one night, they're certainly not going to wear it 2 nights. So I appreciate that single point of contact for that. And another fascinating thing is with this patch, the sensors that it includes an EKG lead. So you guys in particular, you mentioned PPG from the get-go. You're familiar with all these home studies that are mathematically modeling PPG signal in a variety of ways to estimate the apnea hypopnea index, right? PPG is really being leveraged by home sleep studies. And what PPG is you're measuring heart activity in the periphery, right? You're not measuring it at the heart. You're measuring it in the finger, on the wrist. It's a surrogate measure for cardiac activity. The gold standard for cardiac activity is an EKG, and the EKG lead is contained in this patch. And that's exciting because that's how cardiologists diagnose AFib. They don't diagnose it with PPG. They diagnose it with the EKG lead. So that allows for that co-diagnosis, which is really going to streamline the collaboration between cardiology and sleep. And most of all, it's going to get our patients diagnoses that are faster so they can have a successful treatment of their AFib.
Are you a sleep tech looking for new opportunities? Well, Medbridge Healthcare is one of the largest employers of sleep technologists, and they are growing. If you are a sleep technologist interested in a new position, potential paid relocation, or looking for a career advancement, consider a career with Medbridge Healthcare. Now back to the show.
Is there a cardiopulmonary coupling calculation that's done, and does it use the EKG channel that comes?
Sorry, the reason I'm laughing, everyone probably hears me giggling, is that is the first thing I asked the company. I was like, oh, so are you using cardiopulmonary coupling for this? So I don't know the details of their classifier from an IP standpoint. There is an open source CPC, code that Robert Thomas has written all about in the literature, and is what SleepImage actually uses to diagnose sleep apnea. But again, with SleepImage, you can either apply that to like PSG, HST, or they have a ring now, which is again using that peripheral PPG, which is awesome. But again, if you want to make that co-diagnosis of atrial fibrillation and OSA, you need that EKG. And there's somebody he was kind of like an early adopter of sleep technology, Magda Yunus. I don't know if you guys have had him on the show. I mean, he was way before his time. And I was sitting with him at this work group about wearables, and he goes, these new devices, he's like, I don't understand it. They don't record one thing that's in the PSG. They record everything else and not one thing. And that's another nice thing about having EKG is we're all used to looking at EKG in a PSG. We know that Brady tachy pattern, that is what we're used to seeing in association with apneas and hypopneas. It's actually required in the PSG recording. You have to have EKG, so that shows the relevance of it. And this device has that. So I think it's really nice from a familiarity standpoint.
Fantastic. And multi-nights, you did mention that earlier. Do you know how many nights that particular device is able to record?
think that with its battery, I believe it's at least 3. I'm not entirely sure about that. Um, but because could be a battery issue, but having the patient wear it as a patch does make that so much easier for multiple nights.
Absolutely.
I'm kind of going off topic for just a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about your work with principles and practices? That's always been fascinating for me. Just, I know it's the Bible,
Yeah.
but it's when I speak to an author or contributor to that, I just find it fascinating. I mean, if we were in person, you would have the fanboy look in front of you. So, asking for your autograph kind of thing. So could you talk a little bit about that, please? Because it's a fascinating piece for me.
Yeah, so Nancy Collip is the editor in chief of the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine, also who's someone who's been around for a really long time, despite the fact that she still looks 30, if Nancy's listening. I've been one of her editors for JCSM for a very long time, and I get an email from her one day, and it says, "I bet you think I'm asking you to review a paper," and she's like, "I'm not. I want to know they're looking for somebody to assist with the book. I think you'd be great." And so I hopped on a call with Mayor Krieger. He's the best guy ever. And I joined the team with the 7th edition. And so I've been on the senior editorial team ever since. It's probably one of the most rewarding things I do. We have these great authors, and it's what's really wonderful to see is coming out with the book. You see a lot of mentorship. You see more senior people find more junior rising star investigators. And it's really just this testament to how we're keeping our field going. And I think you guys are going to be really excited to see that we're expanding a lot of the technology areas of the book with the up and coming edition. So
That's so cool to hear. And so when you say expanding the technology piece, would you be including, dare I say it, wearables and that sort of thing?
we sure are.
All right, all right.
Yeah.
And so the next question to ask about that is, so how does that tie in with your, your other persona as a teacher? How do you feel it ties in with that?
Yeah, so I love teaching. I love teaching our fellows, our trainees, medical students, but I actually am really interested in alternative sources of learners. So for example, I love peer education. I love educating people that have been in practice for a while. One of the most rewarding things is someone told me once, they're like, "I didn't get circadian rhythms until I listened to your lecture." And that, when you hear something like that, it's huge. I really enjoy translating the technical things like artificial intelligence to people that have maybe never even written a line of code. Like, that's my favorite. And then another exciting group of people is athletes. I get to talk to athletes, and we get to teach them about why sleep is so relevant for their performance. And so it's so many everyone can benefit from sleep education, and that makes it such a great job and a great field.
Well, the one thing we definitely need for you to do is to teach faster, because we need more sleep doctors than the industry is producing right now.
Yeah.
I recently sat in on a patient panel, and this patient went through a hospital system's sleep, just their sort of standard sleep referral, sleep consult process, and it took them 14 weeks just to get through the diagnostic process.
When I hear that, I'm not surprised at all. And I'm actually like, 14 weeks, that's not bad. Yeah. So we need more and more people. We also need, I think my big thing is, never to work harder or devote more resources necessary that are necessary, but to work smarter, right? There's so many great ways of identifying people with sleep apnea. And the guy that's falling asleep in your waiting room with his wife there, who already has the recording of the apneas on her phone, like, that person should have been diagnosed months ago. And the patient and the partner oftentimes know. We need to get those people in for an HSAT. I don't even know if they need to see us unless they have significant questions, and set up with PAP. It's the more difficult cases, the people with lots of comorbidities that make their sleep apnea more complicated, that incorporate central sleep apnea. Those are who we need to be seeing in clinic. And I think that we can find other pipelines to really, really make sure everybody gets evaluated and treated. There's nothing worse than seeing somebody who's had their first stroke or had their first MI or is in AFib that could have been treated 5, 10 years ago.
I spent a good bit of time last year going around to different regional sleep conferences talking about inpatient sleep apnea screening. And the barrier to implementation of those programs always seems to be sleep lab capacity. So it's
Yeah.
like we we could utilize home sleep apnea testing to take care of those less comorbid patients like you mentioned, and really focus on the patients that need that, closer supervision monitoring that comes from, an in-lab sleep test. So
Do
I'm
you
glad
guys?
that we have new products like Huxley
Yeah,
Medical's Sansa device, and appreciate your work in trying to bring those
absolutely.
technologies to the field.
So what
Eh,
I like to say, do you guys have kids?
Yes.
Did
Yeah, I
your
have a
wife
lot of kids.
say, did your wife say, I think I might be pregnant, but I'm going to wait until the doctor has an opening? No, we do a home pregnancy test, right? So
Okay,
we
great
need to
point.
have we
Yeah.
need to have some equivalency here with sleep apnea. I mean, people are even buying their own glucose monitors now, so I think we can move the needle a little bit.
Yep, I agree, and I use diabetes all the time as my sort of point of reference for, because we tell these patients that they may have a serious condition, and then it's weeks and weeks before they can actually do
Right.
anything about it. So we can
Right.
do better.
Agreed.
Any words for people, specifically for new technologists or sleep technologists that are in the educational programs right now, or those that are curious in this field as a profession? Any words for them?
Yeah. So I would say you use the word curious. I was about to say be curious. So a lot is changing in sleep right now, and not everything's going to be solved by technology. You can't lean entirely that way. The human element is incredibly important, even as a huge AI adopter, or that all of us are here. But also, you have to, and especially like as I'm getting older myself, you have to keep an open mind. You have to accept how things are changing and have flexible thinking about how we can implement, because our goal is to help everybody that needs it, not just the people that we can see in clinic.
That's awesome, and love to continue, but we are out of time, Doc. Is there anything else you want to add before we close?
No, this was great. And I love you guys doing this because this helps kind of spread the message about all these new technologies.
Oh, that's thank you. So, where could people get more information about you if they wanted to get in touch or ask any questions or that sort of thing?
Yeah, they can follow me on X. I think I'm Cathy Go underscore sleep. And you can just Google me and find my U of M profile.
Awesome. We will do that. Thank you so much, Doc. It's been a pleasure having you on our show.
Great. Take care.
Thanks. And folks out there, thank you so much for joining us. And we sincerely appreciate all the likes, the comments, and the subscriptions. Most importantly, we sincerely appreciate the shares. We ask you to continue sharing it with everybody, just as Doc said here, who are curious, as well as all your colleagues and friends. With that being said, we say thank you so much once again, and lights on. Before we go, we would like to thank our sponsor, Medbridge Healthcare. Medbridge Healthcare is developing innovative inpatient, post-discharge, and population health programs to screen comorbid conditions, diagnose, and treat sleep disorders. Learn more about their innovative solutions and career opportunities at medbridgehealthcare.com. Once again, you can learn more about their innovative solutions and career opportunities at medbridgehealthcare.com. All right. Now that was a show. What do you think, Robert?
You know,
Post
I
cows.
I am so impressed with the guests that we have had, recently, but all along, of course. But man, we have had some people who are so um, involved in just the groundbreaking technologies and things. I never would. Anytime I see a new home sleep testing device come into the marketplace, I always think to myself, there can't be anything else that's going to differentiate that product from another product. But to
Right. Right.
have an actual EKG channel, for a single patch home sleep testing device is really unique. And the fact that she talked about the prevalence of sleep apnea among patients with atrial
AFib.
fibrillation,
Right.
and it's just incredible. Good, uh, great job to Huxley Medical and to Dr. Goldstein and her involvement. It's I'm so thankful that they allowed us the opportunity to talk to her about that, and just loved having her on the show today. She was great.
I agree. It was definitely a lot of fun. Obviously, she is very passionate about what she does and as a whole, and also passionate about she just like you, very geeky about the about technology, and that's so cool to hear. And to hear that a medical doctor is very interested in math as well as technology. And she was talking about using AI as part of therapy and treatment. That's absolutely fantastic and fabulous to hear and fascinating on top of that because of the fact that you're embracing technology in order to take therapy into the future rather than sticking to the old. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that because those things are tried and true. But at the
Yeah,
same time, we have to look at the future. And that's, Sleep Tech Talk. It's about technology. What is available now? What is available in the future? And where can we go from here? How much better can we do? She even alluded to that, to the fact that, hey, when things were like prior to this, remember how things were and how long things took to get things done. And now you have technologies available to make sure these patients get taken care of immediately rather than waiting 14, 17, 20 weeks, 6 months to see a doctor or get a study done.
absolutely. I feel again, I feel fortunate that we have the opportunity to talk to these folks who are bringing the new technology to the world, and so stay tuned for all of our listeners who are out there because there's still more new things that are on the horizon that are going to be a part of our show. We have guests lined up that have new therapies, new maybe even sort of pre FDA approved. They've started to engage with us to let us know that they've got things on the horizon. So keep listening to Sleep Tech Talk and you'll stay up to date on the latest and greatest in sleep technology.
Well said, Robert. I think that's a great way to close today's talk. So, folks out there, thank you all so much. And until next time, cheers.